So today I want to take a look at something that I've honestly found really interesting lately, and that's old LEGO Star Wars preliminary images. And if you're someone that doesn't know what preliminary images are for LEGO Star Wars sets, they're basically just very early confidential images of upcoming LEGO sets that LEGO sends out in catalogs to these large retail companies like Target and Walmart, etc., and just other internal spaces within the LEGO company and these retail companies. And basically, to put it simply, the point of them is so that these big retail companies can just plan for their upcoming inventories. So that's why LEGO sends them out in these catalogs that are not supposed to be seen by the public, but the reason we have these images is because oftentimes people that work in the retail companies will leak them to the community. However, the thing that actually makes them interesting and intriguing to look at, especially these old ones, is that LEGO sends them out to these companies so far in advance prior to the set's release that oftentimes the actual pictures are of a set that's not finalized, so either a prototype or just a straight up different design. So being able to take a look at these old LEGO Star Wars preliminary images for these old sets that we all know and love, and being able to see their design evolution is really interesting, and that's what I want to take a deep dive into with you guys today. And the first ones we'll start out with are actually from the 2005 Revenge of the Sith wave, and these are arguably some of the most interesting pictures I'm going to show in this video. However, at the same time, unlike the other images that I'm going to show later, these are actually pretty popular, and there's a chance that some of you guys have seen these before, but regardless, they're still pretty interesting. And as you can see, for the most part, they're really just unfinished box art designs. Like as you can see here with this General Grievous Chase set, the builds are actually what ended up releasing. However, the box art is just a little bit different. It's kind of unfinished and has less effects on it. But then you have other sets like this Clone Scoutwalker here, which actually just have a completely different design. As you can see, this looks like a very early model compared to the one that actually released. The colors are different. It's using a plain white clone trooper as a placeholder, and it also doesn't have the sticker on the front of the walker. And then here we can see the Anakin Jedi Interceptor and Vulture Droid set. As you can see, the builds are almost complete and nearly the exact same thing that actually ended up releasing. Same thing is going to go for these other sets like the Ultimate Lightsaber Duel along with the ARC 170. And then it's also going to apply to the Turbo Tank and the Wookiee Catamaran here. However, I actually think these box arts are quite a bit more interesting. For one, as you can see on the Turbo Tank, it's actually using a Phase 1 clone trooper up there in the tower as a placeholder, but then in the cockpit you have a Phase 2 clone trooper, along with down there at the bottom left what looks to be a slightly different version of Mace Windu. I'm pretty sure in the one that I actually ended up releasing, he had a gray torso with tan legs, and this one's a little bit different as you can see. And then when you look at the Wookiee Catamaran here, the Swamp Speeder appears to have slightly different stickers on the front there. It's very subtle and not very easy to notice, but the main thing to note is that as you can see in the top right, Luminara Unduli has a hairpiece. So I don't really know what's going on there. I assume when they took the picture that's shown at the top right, they just didn't have the mold ready yet. And then in this last picture here, you're going to have the TIE Fighter along with the Tri-Droid and then the Wookiee attack set. And as you can see, the Tri-Droid is pretty much like the other ones. It's just a slightly less detailed design that's almost finalized along with a slightly different box art. But if you couldn't tell already, the real interesting one here is the Wookiee attack set, specifically with the Tank Droid and the Dwarf Spider Droid being tan instead of those tacky orange and blue colors like what came out in the actual set, which I think is really strange because one thing I've always wondered about this set is why they made the Dwarf Spider Droid and the Tank Droid blue and orange instead of the right colors. And you know, in these prelim images here, obviously tan isn't the right color either, but I'd say this solid tan color is kind of closer to what they're supposed to look like. And to be honest with you, minus the dish pieces not having the printing on them, I think the tan looks better than what actually released. So I don't know, I just think it's very interesting that in the prelim images they were tan, and then in the official set they're blue and orange, which is really random and not accurate. It just kind of makes me wonder why LEGO was, you know, cycling through so many colors for these two builds. Another thing you might have noticed is that the actual Wookiee flyer has a slightly different design too. It looks like just the back wings use different pieces, and then I think the gun might have a different design. And another thing you might have noticed is that the prelim image, the box art is set in the actual forest of Kashyyyk, and then on the official box art it's set on the beach, which I definitely think was the better option. I'm glad they released this box art and not this one. However, I still think the Tan Tank Droid definitely had potential. The next images I want to take a look at are a handful of prelim images from the 2012 January 1st wave, and these are really cool. I had never seen these before until I started making this video, and also they are extremely blurry, so bear with me on that. But the first one is this image here of 9494 Anakin's Jedi Interceptor. As you can see here, just like the Revenge of the Sith sets I just showed, it's mainly just the box art that's different, but the most notable thing about this image are the minifigures over here on the right, because as you can see, they're mostly just placeholders. None of these figures are actually what came in this set. As you see, you got the Clone Wars Anakin, the Clone Wars Newt Gunray, the Clone Wars Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then also at the bottom there, R2-D2 MT2 is facing backwards for some reason, it looks like. It's really just the little random things like this in these prelim images that make them interesting. The next one right here is the Geonosian Cannon set, which as you can see for Commander Gree, they're using Commander Cody as a placeholder, or what I assume is just the Commander Cody figure without any of the attachments on it, which honestly I find interesting because I imagine that if LEGO ever ended up releasing a standard Phase 1 2/12 Trooper, this might have been what it would have looked like. And then of course, if you didn't notice already, the build is also not complete. They're using some black pieces for the dishes on the actual cannon itself. I'm not sure why. My best guess is that they maybe just didn't have these pieces in brown yet, but other than that, I don't know. However, the most interesting set in this batch of images right here is definitely the one for the ARC Trooper and Commando Droid battle pack, because as you can see right here for the ARC Trooper, they literally put together an entire kind of OG style ARC Trooper as the placeholder figure, which I find really interesting that they went out of their way to do this. The ARC Trooper on the right looks near finalized, they got the helmet done and everything, but the ARC Trooper, as you can see, honestly just looks like a completely unreleased figure. And also, if I'm not mistaken, that light blue and white torso piece is Commander Wolf's torso piece from 2011, or if not Commander Wolf, it's the Wolfpack Trooper's torso piece. And honestly, I feel like some of you guys are looking at this right now and thinking like, oh my gosh, it would have been awesome if they actually released this figure. And like, yeah, I guess it definitely would have been cool to get this OG looking clone trooper right here, but let's be honest, the one that actually ended up releasing with that exclusive helmet mold is so much better. It would have been cool to get this, but I'm so glad we got the other one instead. Another thing to point out with the prelim images of this set right here are the Commando droids, because as you can see there, they're gunmetal gray and not brown, which I mean, obviously this has no connection to the 2025 MTT and the gunmetal gray Commando droids in that set. However, I still just think it's really ironic that 13 years ago in 2012, LEGO almost considered them for this one. And also, now that I think about it, this set was the very first set to include Commando droids in general, so I guess that means that these are technically unreleased figures as well, because they're the old style Commando droids in a gray variant. So who knows, some OG gunmetal gray Commando droids might exist somewhere out there in the world. And then lastly, if you didn't notice already, there are also some images of some original trilogy sets here. However, if you couldn't tell, most of these are nearly finalized images and pretty much exactly what ended up releasing, so they're not really worth talking about. Next up, I actually want to take a look at more 2012 sets. However, these ones are from the summer 2012 wave, not the January wave, and most of these are just finalized images or nearly finalized images, just with a confidential watermark on them. However, a handful of them are actually still incomplete. For example, this Gungan sub right here, which has some interesting placeholder minifigures, specifically that Qui-Gon Jinn there at the top. As you can see, it kind of has a pretty off-putting face print. I mean, the picture is pretty blurry, but I don't think I've ever seen that face print before, and this figure as a whole just looks like another one they kind of jumbled together for a placeholder that just looks kind of off. The same thing is going to go for the Obi-Wan Kenobi placeholder minifigure down there at the bottom right. You know, like I showed earlier, for some of the other sets that needed an Obi-Wan placeholder figure, they just used the previous version, but right here it looks like they just made a different figure with random parts. And like the Qui-Gon Jinn, it just looks kind of strange. And then on top of that, it also looks like they're using the Mon Mothma minifigure for the Queen Amidala placeholder. Another cool one to take a look at is the Sith Fury class Interceptor, where for Darth Malgus, it looks like they're using one of the burnt Anakin Skywalker heads. And then here we have the Malevolence, and unlike the other two, all of the placeholder minifigures are actual existing minifigures, not ones they put together. However, what I think is interesting is that at the top there, it actually has a tactical droid in place of the Battle Droid Commander that came in the official set, and obviously it's too blurry to read the words under it, but this does make me wonder if, you know, LEGO might have considered putting a tactical droid in this set instead of just a standard battle droid. And then underneath that, they're also going to be using Ahsoka instead of Padme, and then from there, all the other minifigures are the ones that actually came in the set. But the tactical droid being there really does make me wonder if at one point they actually did consider putting him in this set. And then lastly, for these 2012 sets, we have Jabba's Palace, and unlike the other sets I just showed, instead of using placeholder minifigures, they're just using straight up blank molds. Like for Jabba there, it's literally just the Jabba mold with no printing on it, which I think is funny. And it looks like they also did the same thing for the Gamorrean Guard along with the Princess Leia Boushh helmet. And then of course you have Aayla Secura there in place of the actual Twi'lek that came in this set. Now the last ones I want to take a look at are actually from the 2015 January wave, and like the other images we've looked at so far, there are some of them that are mostly finalized. For instance, like the microfighters here, they're pretty much finished, maybe just slightly lacking full rendering or something. But then there's also some that aren't finished, and they are super interesting. The first one is the TIE Advanced prototype right here, specifically the placeholder minifigure for the Inquisitor. The picture is too blurry, so I can't make it out, but as you can see, it's using some type of mold for its headpiece or torso body party piece, I guess. I have never seen this before. I don't know if this headpiece is from another theme or something, but it looks really interesting, and honestly, it looks like an awesome figure too. If any of you guys in the comments can make out what this is and know where it's from, please let me know. Then right here we have the T16 Skyhopper, and for the Tusken Raider, it looks like they're using a mummy figure as a placeholder. I assume this is just from another theme. I'm not exactly sure which one, but I think it's funny how they pulled in another figure from an entirely separate theme just to represent a Tusken Raider here. Right here we have the ATDP with a sort of prototype version of Agent Callus, and then we also have prototype versions of the ATDP drivers, which look really strange. Their face prints are in all white, and I guess, you know, that's supposed to allude to their mask being all white. However, it's not a mask, it's just a face print with, you know, a white skin tone pretty much. And honestly, it does look kind of unsettling. Here we have some more sets using placeholder figures, like some figures in Ezra Speeder Chase not having any printing on them, and then a Phase 2 Wolfpack Trooper being the placeholder for the Clone Lieutenant and the Hailfire Droid, which I think is funny. But then lastly here we have the battle packs that released in this wave, and these look awesome. Specifically the Senate Commandos along with the Geonosis Troopers. The Senate Commandos look really strange. It looks like they're using the helmet piece from that one Clone Trooper in the Yoda Chronicles set. I don't remember what it was called. And then aside from that, they're just using random Imperial torso pieces. But then you have the Geonosis Troopers here, and they're using the Kashyyyk Scout Troopers in a dark orange color. And obviously these are just renders here, so these figures probably never existed, but they still look awesome. I never would have thought that the Kashyyyk Scout Trooper would have looked this good in a different colorway. And then aside from those two battle packs, you also have the Imperial Troop Transport as well as the Shadow Troopers, and these ones aren't as interesting. The Shadow Troopers look to be nearly finished. And then you have the Stormtrooper battle packs, just using the 2008 Stormtroopers in place of the Rebel style ones. But man, these two battle packs right here look really cool, specifically the Geonosis Troopers. But anyways, that's gonna do it for this video. These are just some preliminary images that I have stumbled upon over the past few weeks or so, and I just really wanted to show them off. So with that being said, let me know what you think about them down in the comments below. If you're new, please consider subscribing, and if you want to check out more of my videos, you can see them on the screen right now.